It's time for Dopey. And I'm gonna sing a song for you. Dave Chris gonna show you a thing or two. You'll have some fun now with me and all the gang, learning from each other while we do our thing. Na, 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 gonna have a good time. Hey, na, 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 gonna have a good time. This is Dave and Chris coming at you with music and fun. And if you're not careful, you might learn something before it's done. Hey, hey, hey.
This episode of Dopey is brought to you by our friends at Aloe Recovery, located in sunny Southern California in Silver Lake and Malibu, and created by our friend Bob Forrest and his friend and our friend Evan Haynes and their friend Bob. This program at Aloe was basically invented to give addicts a place where they go to get respect and get well. They have a detox that makes you feel comfortable if you're super sick. They do amazing amenities like surfing, sound bath meditation, sweat lodges. They have a holistic approach to getting better, but mostly it's designed as a place where an addict can get respect in their very vulnerable time. If you're feeling incredibly vulnerable and you need a place where you can get cared for, where you can get treated with compassion rather than control, I totally recommend Aloe. I have some friends who went there, and they all say the same thing, that Aloe is a fine place to go. If you're feeling fucked and you don't know where to get treatment and you're willing to go to California, I would go to Aloe. This episode of Dopey is also brought to you by Just Coffee Co-op. Just Coffee Co-op has some really good fucking coffee. In fact, just this morning, I took my bag of Just Coffee Co-op beans because I thought I was really cool to have them send me beans, and I ground it up in my crazy grinder, made it fine, and I put it in our coffee machine. And Linda usually hates when I make a pot of coffee. She used to love the K-Cup. She would like it when I go to the store and get her a cup of coffee. But the JustCoffee.coop coffee is the first time Linda likes drinking a pot of coffee at home. And I have this amazing blend. It's called Bike Fuel, and it's fucking great. It's got a picture of a skeleton on a bike on the front. I love that. The coffee has notes of chocolate. It is delicious coffee. Go to justcoffee.coop to get this amazing coffee. Every blend you could ever imagine. Beautiful packaging, and they practice social justice from the grounds up, which means they give their growers a good deal. Go to justcoffee.coop, type in Dopey Pod for a little discount. Tell them we want the Dopey Blend. Tell them you'll buy the Dopey Blend. I want the Dopey Blend. Justcoffee.coop. This episode of Dopey is also brought to you by listeners like you. If you guys want to help out and give money on Patreon, feel free. It's www.patreon.com/dopeypodcast. If you don't want to, that's totally fine too. If you want stickers, Venmo me. If you want a hat, Venmo me. I hate to ask you guys for money, but I do love to get it. Now, enough of all these ads. Here's the fucking show. Hello and welcome to Dopey, the podcast about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And I'm Dave, and we're at my dad's house, and we have a very special guest in person, which we rarely do. So he's on the phone, though. I don't know. What are you doing?
Cleaning my glasses.
He's cleaning his glasses. This is acclaimed...
I'm not on the phone.
Acclaimed author, poet. What else do you do? Addict, alcoholic, father, husband. Nick Flynn. Welcome to Dopey.
Thanks. It's great it's amazing to see the inner sanctum here, to see where the magic happens. This is amazing apartment here. For all of you who haven't got to see it yet.
So if you
A lot of tchotchkes. Tchotchkes?
tchotchkes
Tchotchkes?
it's a proper term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you lay the lay of the land for the uninitiated?
It's whiter than I expected. There's like white chairs and white walls and pictures of flowers in the walls. And I got to meet Alan earlier. He seems much nicer than you make him out to be.
I don't think I've ever underestimated his niceness. In fact, that was a recent criticism I had on the show, which was that I'm too mean. Did you listen to the episode with the BBC lady?
I did, yes. I
And
did.
I was, I almost even went as far as to blame him for my addiction on that show.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, I heard that.
But
yeah.
I didn't mean that. That was not what I meant. What I meant...
It was funny because you were sort of two minds. You were like, no one can stop you except grace from your addiction. Yet where the fuck were you?
No, it was more like...
There was a little... Well, there was that. I mean...
When he tells the story, he says it in this like very, oh, shucks, I don't know what was going on. And then all of a sudden we were at the theater and you're at Beth Israel and I have to go see you. And it's like...
And he didn't know what heroin was either. He thought you'd be out in a week.
Well, it's that kind of stuff, but it's.
Yeah.
I want to, Dad, come here, come in, please. I want to clear the air. I want this to be 100% documented for the thing. Dad, here, please share Nick's mic for a second, and I want to apologize for ever insinuating that you were at all responsible for my addiction.
It's about time. Yes, good.
I've apologized about this before in the past.
Yeah, but now you mean it, though. That's good.
How do you know I mean it?
No, maybe you don't mean it still.
I just think I apologize for insinuating that my addiction was caused by you or your absenteeism or your absent professor act.
No, that's absolutely true. It wasn't caused by me at all, positively.
Well, now what is this? What is this false bravado that you're coming with?
No. I'm happy that you're finally admitting it, yes.
I've never spent time saying that my addiction was caused by you.
No, listen.
Be serious for a second. You try so hard to do shtick.
With the BBC lady,
Yes.
I think you were really very nervous and you said things that you really didn't really think through and meant. So I think what you're saying now is true.
You have this a preternatural need to put me down when you come on the show. I was predator. Is that a word, Nick?
Well, preternatural father, like,
Okay.
patter is father.
Well, this is right. I wouldn't say I was nervous. I would say I was excited and anxious, and maybe yes, I was nervous. I wanted the show to be good, and you sit there saying, "How could this happen?" Where this sort of like not being involved.
I just said what I remembered to happen, that we got this one phone call, and that was a major shock. That's exactly what I meant.
Now, to back it up a little further, I had a wonderful childhood. I come from an incredibly supportive and generous family, and sometimes I can be an entitled asshole.
Yes, okay.
And you have white privilege. All right.
Thank you
Thank you for coming
You see,
on
you're
this
starting more trouble again. You see?
Do you have anything else you want to say to the Dopey Nation?
No, I'm.
How about Nick Flynn? Nick Flynn comes off his bike and he comments at how suntanned you are, and then asks for suntan lotion, which I thought was classic.
It was very nice. Yeah.
All right. So thank you, and I apologize. And anybody who doesn't believe that I'm sorry, sorry. You accept?
Yes.
All right. Back to the show. Now we got that out of the way. That sordid bit of information.
But that story about, I can understand. I mean, as an addict, like sort of wondering, being lost in the middle of it, like wondering, just like, where is, how do I get out of this? And sort of trying to reach for something to get out of it, and thinking like, where is everybody? Where's the lifeline out of this? And of course, you'd reach toward like, at some point of your subconscious or some point, in the dark moment, you'd be like, why don't you fucking help me?
Well, I don't think it was like that, and I think one of the interesting things though is that I think about your story, and it was like the opposite. Our stories are like the opposite story. Like, I came from this super safe middle class, both my parents were teachers, both my parents were like, middle class Jewish, overprotective, and you came from the wilds of Scituate, Massachusetts.
That's true. I mean, the wild. If anyone who goes to Scituate wouldn't think it's so wild.
And also, I want to apologize for bringing. I should have introduced you properly before I brought my father on the show. Nick Flynn, he wrote a very, very famous book called Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. It got made into a very, very big movie called Being Flynn with Robert De Niro and Paul Dano. His other book just came out, or what was the second book about? Another making the movie.
I made a book. I wrote a book called while it was being filmed. I was on set every day, and I wrote a book about the making of my first book into a film. So I wrote a book, they made a film about it, then I wrote a book about making a film about it.
I love that. I mean, that's what I'm starting now.
It's called the reenactments.
I'm starting the reenactments now.
Cool.
But anyway, so you grew up in Scituate, your father was gone, and your mother was seriously depressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say seriously depressed, because it wasn't... I'm not sure. I mean, there's no diagnosis of her, and she didn't really take any medication. Maybe there wasn't medication back then, but she was working a lot. I mean, she was young. She was like 20. She was a single mother with 2 kids by the time she was 20. And, her husband, my father, was an alcoholic. I mean, there's pretty much no question about that. And her father was an alcoholic, and her mother was an alcoholic. And there was a lot of alcoholism in our family and drug use. And so... it was a hard time. So I don't know, she was very vivacious and very alive and young and beautiful and also, and yet, I mean, certainly depression was part of it, yeah.
Well, you also described that she would take pills by the handful kind of thing.
I didn't say by the handful, yeah.
It would kind of, I guess I inferred handfuls of pills.
No, she had bottles of I'm not sure what Darvon and Furanol are, some kind of like...
Darvon is some sort of opiate derivative thing. I got prescribed that a couple times.
Yeah, they were strong. I mean, they would knock out pills of some sort, yeah.
And your mother tragically killed herself, so I'm sorry for that, and I don't want to talk about it lightly. I mean, must have been a terrible, terrible thing to happen. Because also, this book, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, is it's just such a beautiful book. It's such an amazing book, and maybe I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed it. I was working one day, and it was very busy. It was like on the weekend, and I was getting French fries, and I was running around, and Nick was in the store, and he kind of like tapped me, and he's like, "Oh, I liked the show." And I looked at Nick. I thought he was crazy. He's sitting there. He's all sweaty in his Danzig shirt, and I'm like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" And he's like, "What is Herzog on top of Danzig about? What does that mean?"
The IFC, the cinema down the street.
Yeah.
IFC Cinema. They have a whole line of T-shirts where they take directors and they put them with heavy metal bands.
Werner Herzog.
Yeah, Werner Herzog with Danzig. Yeah, together.
What was Werner Herzog's movie?
Oh, he's done a lot. He did Grizzly Man. I mean, that might be one that you remember.
That's one where the guy gets killed by the bear?
Gets eaten by the bear at the end.
What an amazing movie.
But Herzog's done amazing movies. Yeah, beautiful. You did the one about the cave, the cave paintings called, I forget what it's called, but it's like you go in and he did it in 3D, like going into and seeing the oldest art in the world in this cave painting in France. And he's wild. He's a wild man. He's great.
Well, yeah. I like the shirt. But anyway, Nick's at Katz's, looking at me like he's crazy, and at that point, like Dopey was I don't know, was rolling around.
I was looking at you admiringly. I was like,
but
wow,
that was crazy to me. Yeah. The idea of any sort of admiration was crazy, and I think Dopey had just done This American Life, and actually people were starting to reach out with like people with books and this and that, and here was Nick at Katz's, and he's like, I want to give you a copy of my book. So he hands me a copy of Another Bullshit Night in Suck City while I'm taking care of like a million people. It was very busy that day. And he inscribed it, which is very beautiful. He writes
I forgot what I wrote, actually.
I'll remind you.
Yeah. The object is here in front of us.
Where is it? Oh, here we go. He wrote for Dave, and then he wrote and Chris in parentheses. And he wrote, wishing you another bullshit night in Dopey Nation. Nick Flynn, March 2019, Katz's. And I ran downstairs and I put it in my locker. And Nick was, but as I'm going downstairs, I'm kind of examining the book. And I see all the awards that Nick won. Because Nick won like every fucking award there is. And there's a lot of like great quotes. And I'm like, wow, this guy maybe isn't so crazy. Or maybe he's crazy and talented. Maybe he's crazy talented.
But I thought you said that I was looking at you like you were crazy. Now it's turned. Now it's turned.
I think there was two crazy people, and I come upstairs, and I had also said to my friend who worked there, "Oh, this guy's a writer, blah blah blah." And my friend comes running out of the office, and he says, "I think he's married to the actress Lily Taylor." I said, "I don't think so. That guy's crazy." and then I run after you as you're leaving, and I said, "Are you married to Lily Taylor?" And he's like, "I am." And I was like, "Weird." So that was the origin of our meeting.
Did you get to the point in the book where Lily appears?
I did. Did you add that? Did you? I got to the end of the book.
I did. I added. That was the last edit to the book. I had another actress in there.
Who was it?
I can't say. That'd be.
Was it Lisa Bonet?
Someone else. Someone from the '90s, an actress from the '90s.
It wasn't Lisa Bonet.
No, it wasn't. No. You can go through them all, and I'll just say no.
So you changed it to Lily after you guys were together?
After our first date or something. That's because I didn't know any actresses from the '90s. So.
Well, the craziest part of the book. I mean, if you guys don't know about this movie or this book, it basically tells the story of Nick's life and the beginnings of his alcoholism and his drug addiction, and his, I guess it was a career working with the homeless.
Yeah, I worked with the homeless for many years, for about 7 years, all through my 20s, until I was into my 30s, 7 years or so, yeah.
Now, Nick's father was homeless.
He wasn't homeless when I started, is the point. He was living in a cheap apartment in Boston. He was living in, SROs, single room occupancy places.
Yeah, Linda used to work at one here.
Which there used to be a lot of. It used to be where marginal men especially would live. And it's sort of what made cities interesting too. There were just a lot of these places where you could just go and live really cheaply in a tiny little shitty room for very little money and just work a little job and just do whatever you were doing. And then they're mostly gone for the most part now. And they were going then. This was back in the early '80s. They were sort of, cities were gentrifying and stuff. So my father got caught up in that and ended up homeless after I'd been working for 3 years at the shelter. And then he walked through the doors. Yeah.
Well, you describe in the book kind of the allure of working with the homeless has to come from someplace within you. And if your father hadn't been homeless yet, what do you think it was?
That's a good question. Yeah, because it makes sense. In retrospect, when you look at it, it makes all sense. Your father's homeless, no, but he wasn't homeless. Was I the magnet that pulled him out of his apartment into the shelter, or was he the magnet, that type of person? And I think the closest I can get to is that I didn't know my father. And I started working at the shelter within a year after my mother had committed suicide. And I was really lost. And I was doing construction at the time in Boston. That's what I did. I did carpentry. And I wasn't a very good carpenter. And I wasn't very good at many things. I got fired from every restaurant I worked in. So I wasn't really succeeding in things necessarily. But also I was, in some ways, in the shelter, it was just a place where I felt like I belonged in some way, and for whatever reason, but it might have been, just to find one thing I was using, at the time I was definitely, using, and there was a high tolerance for that. There were a lot of guys out of prison. They go out of prison, they start working at the shelter. They'd get out of rehab, start working at the shelter. They would, or be actively using, and they should be getting into rehab or something.
Do you remember what drew you in the first place?
What drew me into it?
Yeah.
Well, I remember a woman, I was doing construction, and this woman, I was living on a boat in Boston, and this other woman that lived on another boat next to us was talking, and she, her father lived in the boat. I think she would sometimes be in the boat, and she worked there. She worked at the shelter. Her name was Giselle. She's a really wonderful family, and she was working there, and she just sort of said, you should check it out. She was just really you should. She just could see I was lost, and she thought it would be a good place for me, I think. So I just went in and checked it out. So.
And what were you?
It was also political too. It was a political thing too. It felt like a way to be politically active, there was this sort of crisis in the country of there was just beginning back then, in the early '80s, this sort of wave of homelessness, which is hard. With young people now, if you talk to them, they've grown up with just thousands of people sleeping on the streets of every city, and it just wasn't like that when I was a kid. You didn't see that many people sleeping on the streets when I was a kid. So
see, I did. When I grew up here, there were tons of people homeless.
New York was sort of particular, but it went into the suburbs. There were every little church in every little town in every state, had to set up like 6 beds for homeless people. I mean, it became like a real epidemic. Like, yeah, a big city like New York would always have like a number of homeless people, but it like multiplied by 10 in the 80s.
Now that I think about it, though, I feel like for you, and I only know you a little bit, but I feel like for you, there was a mixed draw. Like, you love weird stories. You love down and out stories. You're drawn to them. And you were also like of this sort of punk rock political mind where you were like, all of those things are checked off here. I can fit in and I can be part of it.
I definitely wasn't I was very anti-yuppie and anti-gentrification and punk rocky. It just felt like I had friends that were very good friends of mine. There's a street in Boston called Newbury Street, and they would go work in restaurants. And Newbury Street is very fancy. It's like the fanciest street, and they could fit into that culture, and they could fit into like people with money and stuff. I just couldn't fit into that culture. So I felt just much more at home with, and also it was also like the tolerance. Like I could, there was a very low bar, of what you needed to do to work there. You just had to show up, and
you had to show up. You had to not be freaked out by the stuff that was going to happen. And what level of alcoholic addiction were you when you started there?
I mean, I was like, when I was a kid, I started, drank for the first time when I was like 12 or something. I got drunk for the first time, and then, went through my teenage years, getting increasingly drunk. By the time I had my driver's license, I totaled 3 vehicles before I was 18. I went to the hospital. I lost my spleen in a motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
Drunk. I totaled 2 other cars at both times I was using. Hit other people's cars. It was a disaster, and went to jail. Was handcuffed. Went to jail, and all that stuff when I was a teenager. So after I lost my spleen when I was 18, and that sort of it sort of like woke me up in a way. Like I got to be more careful because I want to keep getting fucked up, but I don't want to
You don't want to lose any more organs.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to have the police involved. So I was doing a lot of sort of maintenance. Like I was high every day, but not and I would only, go out. I would only go too far once a month or something. So it wasn't I was working every day, and also I was working too because I also didn't have a place to fall back to. There was no home to go back to. Once my mother died, we didn't have a home. There wasn't a place if things fell apart, someone would pick me up. So I sort of had to figure out a way to sort of have my own job, have a place, have all that stuff.
Well, one weird thing that sort of struck me when I was thinking about you coming in, and I was thinking about what had happened with my dad, that I had somebody wrote me that I was an entitled asshole, and I thought about we had conversations where you've been seen as an entitled asshole, but we came from such different entitled sort of spheres. But I thought of your parents, and your parents were both raised with money.
Yeah, both my parents, yeah.
And yet they did the opposite. You know what I mean? It's just interesting that generationally how it can switch up.
Yeah. Both my parents were, they had means. They're not just this. This is you'd call it middle class. I mean, your dad was a teacher, a high school teacher, right?
Both my parents were teachers. Yeah,
which I'd say it's almost working class. It's not solid middle class. It's sort of work. You're living in public housing, and it's.
Well, it all worked.
That's
out.
what I would say.
It worked out for our family because my parents had such a crazy work ethic, and because of public housing, and because my mother made the 2 of them do jobs after school and work every summer, and every year they would put all their money into retirement. And it was I feel like it was the opposite for your parents. Your parents did not approach the world with this crazy, sensible, fear-driven life.
Well, my mother did. I mean, my mother was quite pragmatic. She just wanted to make it on her own, but it was almost impossible. I mean, she just rejected, for whatever reasons, rejected the money she came from and wanted to be independent. Because she also had rejected by marrying my father, by getting pregnant when she was 17, and just leaving a very difficult alcoholic family to make her own difficult family. And then she was just I'm gonna, I made my bed, I'm gonna lay in it, so I'm gonna lie in it. So she just, I think that was more, it was sort of this fierce independence was also with some, addiction thrown in. It was a lethal mix in some way. You couldn't ask for help. Your sign on the wall saying "help me," that might have been good for my mother to say, to have to ask for help, actually ask for help.
And it could have changed a lot of stuff in your life.
It could have. But whether my grandfather, her father, could have actually helped her, could have. I mean, he could have helped her financially in a second, but whether psychically he could have gotten over whatever he was doing, So
Right. And those are bigger questions that we can possibly ponder.
Yeah.
And before,
But that thing, I was sort of resistant to like the thing about you being entitled and coming from this means. So I said, it seems like real American working class, like
right. But it's more like
not working class, but like lower middle class or something, like not like solid, like
No, that's how we came up, and
Yeah.
obviously I went
Yeah.
to public school, and I went to private college until I got kicked out, and then I went to public college, and my parents did pay for treatments. I went to a ton of public detoxes.
Yeah.
And now, like, miraculously, like, my life is better, and I act like I came up with a lot of very rich kids. I went to a school with a lot of rich kids. I get a kick out of it, but I never needed anything. I never wanted for anything. I worked my whole life, but if I needed something, my parents would give it to me. You know what I mean? Like, I was very well taken care of. And also, like, I grew up sitting in front of the TV. So, like, there is sort of like a couch potato-ness that kind of gets mixed up with entitlement. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's regardless. I get hate mail from fans in the Dopey Nation who feel like I'm entitled. So fuck them. But on the other hand, I'm more entitled than a lot of other people.
Sure.
Now, one of my favorite stories, and it just struck me as like a pseudo sort of innocent Dopey story in the book, which was like you describe your mother as having a lot of different boyfriends. And one of the boyfriends decided he was going to grow weed in the backyard of the house.
Yeah. She married him. Yeah.
And that was before you started smoking pot, right?
Yeah, right before. Yeah,
which is funny because it's like you just missed it.
Yeah. I killed the plants. I went out and I was horrified because we lived in this little town and we were also in like this really sort of shabby house, like this really it was like a converted summer cottage, and the mother would date contractors a lot, like carpenters a lot, just because the houses needed work, and so she'd have some help. And so this guy was, he was young, but he was also a carpenter in a sense, like he didn't really know what he was doing. He was just back from Vietnam. He was 10 years younger than her. He was 22, she was 32, I was 12. And so he was sort of like an older brother. It was an odd relationship, and he was struggling. He was really deep into PTSD, and doing drugs. He was doing heroin. He was doing a lot in our town, but he also started growing marijuana in our backyard, in this tiny backyard, and there were other houses around that could see it. And I was like horrified we were going to get arrested, and so I went out and I pulled the plants out by the roots and shaved the roots off and stuck them back in, as if he wouldn't notice when he pulled it up that there were no roots on it. Like it was like clearly shaved with a knife. And then he just like that day they were just in the toaster oven like toasting, like he was just cooking it up like the.
That's so funny. And your brother had like added bleach without knowing that you had done it. Right?
Yeah, because I'm not totally sure. My brother always has like these stories, and when I say a story, he always has
He needs to top it.
Well, he has a matching story that seems to mirror the one I told. Like, I'm like, really, in the same day you did that? Like that?
So you think it's a lie?
One of us is misremembering, which is very possible. So, like, I can't imagine we both did it on the same day, but it's possible.
I think that's funny. I think it's funny, like, the idea or the deal of misremembering anything.
Yeah.
Like I try to look back on my life all the time, and I don't remember so many things.
Well, I have the thing with me in the book. I have the moment in the book where it's in this book where I get sober, where I smoke crack one night. That's in the book, right?
I don't remember. You told me this story was in the movie, and I don't remember it in the book. But like, please tell the story.
So yeah, I was working. My father had been homeless for like 2 years, and when he showed up at the shelter. My addiction just like ramped up. I just started really getting fucked up. Like I didn't know how to handle it. And so I just started really using more, mostly drinking pot.
But before you even get there, you're working in the shelter.
Yeah.
You know your father's been...
Well, I knew for a couple months that he'd been evicted.
Right.
And then, but I gave him some money so he wouldn't show up at the shelter. I gave him like $300 or something so he wouldn't show up at the shelter.
Did you say you better not come to Pine Street?
Yeah. I said, don't show up where I work. So then one day after, I don't know, 4 months or something, I came into work one day and they took me into the office. The supervisor took me to the office, and the supervisor just like a guy. I was a supervisor sometimes. It was just like a guy like me, and he said a guy came in today. He said it was your father, and And I knew it really was my father. And I was like, okay. And he said, so what do you want to do? You can just go home. You don't have to stay here. So they gave him a bed. I said, well, what did you do? And they gave him a bed for the night. So I knew he was going to show up again for the bed a little later that night. They gave him a bed ticket.
So what did you do?
That night I just went out and worked and waited for him to show up, you know.
Was it terrifying?
Well, it was many things. It was a bizarre mix of emotions. It was, suddenly like, you can appear like in a job, like people don't know your whole life when you're working, but suddenly like it seemed like a real deep, there was shame around it. And there was this deep shame sort of rose up like that, like, oh, now everyone's going to see who I am. Like,
but there's so many other components because your father had left. He didn't raise you.
Yeah.
He was your father in name, but not in action.
Well, he'd been in prison. He'd been, he was a con man. He was a really messy drunk.
He was also, is he still alive?
No, he died 5 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. He seems like a crazy person, basicly.
Yeah, but it's hard to say how much of that is like alcohol induced too.
Right, a character.
Yeah,
we'll say he was, because like, and I really, a piece of the book that I just loved is in the beginning of the book that we have these flashes into his life and him in Florida and him in Boston and him trying to run your grandfather's car dealership. And it's like you can really see it. And I love that. And so as your father descended, you were coming of age and you just heard of his descent?
Well, my mother, he started sending letters to me from federal prison. He got put away for basically bank robbing. It was like he was forging checks and passing them like all around, but not very elegantly in some way because he was getting photographed doing it. He worked with some gangsters. And
he was no catch me if you can type.
No. Like he liked to be filmed, so he sort of liked to charm the tellers with his oily charm and sort of seduce them. And he'd always go to a woman to get them to cash the check, and he'd pretend to be from, the upper class. Like he'd wear like Brooks Brothers suits and things like that. And but he was just getting filmed the whole time. They knew who he was, and they caught him after a couple of years. Doing this, and he went to jail for a while, and so he started writing me letters from federal prison, and I sort of asked my mother about it. I was around 15 or so, and I'd say like, so what's up with, what's the story of this? So, and she would sort of just tell me very abbreviated versions of it. She didn't want to talk about it much. So.
Right, because it was very painful for her. Because
she bad blood, a lot of bad blood between them. Yeah.
I'm sure. They had 2 kids together, and I'm sure for a second there was the possibility of having a normal middle class family for a second.
I think it does seem like she was really trying to jump ship from a bad situation at home. Her upbringing, I think, was sort of nightmarish in a way, with the alcoholism there and whatever. Like it just felt like there was like some bad stuff going on. So she just jumped ship onto the next ship that was going by,
which was him. And
of course you're gonna, your radar isn't that good at that point, so you're gonna go. It's familiar, someone who's also a drunk, and
right. So how old were you that fateful night where your dad showed up?
I was 27.
So you were 27, and you were full blown alcoholic, stoner.
Well, I was highly functional. I was like really, I was working every day, but it was just it got messier after he showed up. Like it was because I really didn't want to like have police involved anymore or hospitals involved. And I just wanted to be able to get high every day, but without consequences. I was going to be a better alcoholic than I had seen in my family.
Right. You were going to be a functional alcoholic, which is a great term. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works at all.
Well, it doesn't. It's got a short
shelf life.
Yeah.
Now the next question, or the next really interesting component to the story, is that Nick's father, Jonathan, fashioned himself to be the great American writer.
Yeah.
He had this dream of writing the great American novel, of being a legendary writer. Now, when did you start writing?
Yeah, that's
He's spitting ice into his hand as he talks.
It fell onto the floor.
It's okay. Don't tell my dad.
I was trying to do it subtly.
Sorry, I ruined that for you. I apologize.
So, I began writing when I was a kid. Like, I think before I knew that he was a writer. So my mother didn't talk about him to us as far as I know, like at all. But maybe she had mentioned he was a writer. But I don't think that's what encouraged me to write. I just felt it was like I just had this fascination with writing, with books, with like language, and it seemed like something that was fun to do. It was fun. It was like somehow creating worlds out of language was fun to me. So I did it when I was like a kid. When I was like 11 or 12, I began, and then I began, I got drunk for the first time I was 12. But then, like, by the time I was 16, I was writing, science fiction stories. When I was 11, I was writing like Sherlock Holmes type stories. I was sort of mirror whatever I was reading. I just found it really fun. I wouldn't do it in school. I do it outside of school. It just seemed like the thing I could do on my own.
Well, don't you think that's pretty wild? That you had this ambition and this desire that was your father's whole identity without knowing it was his whole identity?
I mean, I don't think I knew it was his identity, but I didn't know much. If I knew, it wasn't like a really clear thing. And if it was presented as being a really bad thing to do. Like to call yourself a writer was to say you were basically irresponsible.
Right, because he's called himself a writer and he wasn't.
Yeah.
I'm a writer like your dad's a writer. Like I name things and like I do something and I'm like, that's my book, and I just come up with an idea and I say that's going to be my book. I wrote one thing, which was my blog for the Cats thing. Did you ever read it?
I didn't read it. No,
you have to read it. You have to read it.
Okay.
But
it's still up.
Yeah.
Are you still doing it or
no? Your dad was in prison, and he worked at a button, right? Well, he let people in and out of the prison, and he called his book The Button Man.
Yeah, when you say he worked at a button, I was like, he worked at a button? What is that? Yeah,
right?
He pressed the button, that let people in and out of the prison. Supposedly, that's what he says. And there was a little cage, and someone had to show some sort of identification, and if they showed it through the glass, he'd press the button and let them in or out. Yeah.
I just love the title, The Button Man.
The Button Man. I know, it's a good title. Yeah,
it's a great title.
And the first 30 pages of the book, he did have a manuscript of that book, but he supposedly had dozens of books, but they were all just sort of little clippings of ideas in envelopes, like written on cocktail napkins and stuff with photographs and things. They're really the loose. I mean, not even a draft of something, but this was actually a draft. Some woman who I met the woman too. I got to meet all the people from his life in the writing the book, but I met the woman who typed up the whole manuscript for him, like that got it actually onto the form. And the first 30 pages of it are really quite good. It's really sort of experimental and strange and a hybrid of like letters and dreams and like little imagistic moments it's really quite good for 30 pages. And then it falls apart like for the next like 500 pages into incoherence. Like it's just, he can't maintain it, which is almost like his life too. Like he sort of like he met my mother when he was in his late 20s, like 27, almost, the same age when he showed up at the shelter that I was. And I think he could still sort of like have that sort of like allure at that moment, but then it just falls into incoherence, which I think is what addiction does also. Like you can hold it together for a while. Like you can be sort of charming in a certain way, low-level charm, and then it just falls apart,
Well, the substance gets the better of you.
Yeah, you become the substance.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happened to me. Yeah. When he shows up, I mean, I do find it so fascinating that he was this aspiring writer, and then that's what you became. Were you writing while you were working at the homeless shelter? Yeah,
I was writing. I was writing through but that was when I was using. So when I was outside the shelter, I'd write, but I was really writing when I was high or drunk or something. And so you wake up in the morning, you can't read it. You can't I'd have all these sort of visions and ideas and things, but I couldn't. Nothing was coming together. Like my mind, I was confused. You know how you get. When I finally, went to therapy, like after my father had been homeless for a couple of years, I went to therapy, and the therapist, the first day I went in, he was just like, "Well, you're an alcoholic, you're a drug addict." And I was like, "Well, I know that. I mean,
that's what I do.
That's what I do. Yeah, he said, "You're an alcoholic." I said, "Oh, I know. I've been an alcoholic since I was a kid. That's what we all called ourselves. In my hometown, we called ourselves alkies. That was like just a term of endearment. We're all alkies, and we thought it was funny." And it was, when you're a kid, it was funny. Well, totaling the cars, I guess, wasn't. But
losing your spleen is not that comical. I guess in retrospect, it can be.
Yeah, it was a consequence. It was like, it wasn't good. Yeah.
What was your using like when you first started in therapy, or at that moment?
Well, that was that moment where I smoked crack, which I say, in the book. I think I say it in the book. I don't know. It's in the movie, too. You see me smoking crack in the movie. So I see, I've written a couple books, but I'm pretty sure it's in the first book. It's just a moment, too. It's this moment I smoked crack. It scared me because I was so, I just stayed up all night. I became completely, crack is a strange thing. Like, you get you want more like within 20 minutes. You just want to take another hit. You want to take another hit. You just keep wanting to take it, which was, I had that experience really. I liked, when I was a kid, we used to do crystal, and I liked that because it would just last forever. You would just do for like $10, you'd just be high forever for like a day or something. And but crack was strange. It was so strange. So, so in the book, I write that I got scared. Shortly thereafter, I got into therapy. They told me to quit, and da-da-da.
Oh, that was what begot the therapy.
Yeah,
was
yeah.
the crack experience.
But then when we were talking about misremembering, before I was thinking of that too. That's how I brought it up. Because a friend of mine that I used to get high with back there, who used to worked at the shelter with me. She said, like, what is that shit about smoking crack once? We used to smoke crack all the time. Like, that she was suggesting that it was like more of a common occurrence. And I can't really say for sure who's right in that case. I can't say I definitely did it once or that we did it more than once. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I talk to old friends about stuff that I'm sure is a certain way because you also tell a story. If you tell a story a few times,
it becomes the truth.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And somebody else tells it and you're like, I don't remember that.
Well, it's the thing about being an addict, too, is like you just lose all credibility. Like you're telling stories, you lose that sense. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, maybe, that might be. You don't have a solid ground to work from.
But the best thing is it doesn't matter. Because whatever an addict decides to tell is the story, basically. Now, when you were smoking crack I wanted to ask you about, because it sounded to me, and you don't really go into it too much in the book, but at that point in your life, it just sounds very much that you're hanging out with this very, like, kind of arty punk rock group in the, what is it called?
Combat Zone?
The Combat Zone.
Yeah.
What was that was a Billy Joel song. I'm stranded in the combat zone. I walk through Bedford style alone.
Yeah, we weren't listening to Billy
You weren't
Joel.
listening to Billy Joel?
No. Not in Boston,
in Situate?
Not in Boston,
What were you listening to, like the Dead Boys and shit?
All sorts of, like, punks. I mean, Boston,
what were you listening to?
Well, Boston in the 80s.
You didn't come up listening to Glass Houses and Journey Escape?
Oh, my God, no.
It's not my fault. My sister listened to this.
Well, we're going to talk about, the Clash. I mean, that was a big thing. The Clash was earlier. That was like the early 80s. But
well, the Clash was late 70s. But so what was the Combat Zone?
Combat Zone was the adult entertainment district in Boston. So it's where the strip joints were. And then the building that we moved into had been abandoned. Me and my friend Ivan, who was he was a heroin addict, and he and my best friend was Richard, and he was a heroin addict, and we would, Ivan and I wandered around, like, looking for drugs, but also looking for places to live when I was, like, 24, in Boston, and Ivan was clever, like, he was older, he was, like, 10 years older or so, and he would go to, like, we would find buildings, and he would go to the city hall and look up the owner and try to figure out who the owner was and try to figure out, we'd find abandoned buildings and try to find one that we could move into. And so we found this place. We found this, like, amazing strip joint in the Combat Zone. It was
What year was that?
1984.
It was like the squatty days.
Yeah, it was before, like, it was like you'd call it a loft, but it was like not like it was really trashy. It was an old abandoned strip joint that the FBI had shut down like 10 or 15 years before for it being really seedy. And it had been a place called Good Time Charlie's that my mother used to go to with her boyfriend at the time, like right before she died. In the last like 5 years of her life, she was with this guy who's a great guy. He's a really great guy who was a gangster, though. He was like a drug smuggler, a gangster. And they would go, this was like a gangster bar that they would go to. And then it got shut down. We moved, 15 years later, we moved into this building and lived on every floor. So,
and was it like some sort of anarchist, punk rock, squat sort of place?
A lot of us in the building ended up working at the shelter. So there was that. And then also people worked for like an organization called Food Not Bombs, which is like a, anarchist thing. Yeah, so it was political. We would do protest things there. We did like, we organized things there. Yeah.
And what was the using then? Like, were you guys all tripping? I imagine you smoked weed every day.
We drank and smoked weed, and then like you'd supplement it on other times, like with stuff that was around with, probably didn't do much. I did coke, did some coke, but it didn't do much speed. Like the meth thing, I thought meth just vanished. I can't believe it came back. Like I thought like people were clearly, that was like bad news. And then suddenly when it came back, was like amazed that people are, you're still doing meth? Like, that's horrible.
But it's like what you said. It's very strong. You spend
It's
$10
cheap.
bucks.
And it's so
you
cheap.
get
Yeah,
fucked
yeah.
up
And you get
forever.
so fucked up. But you really felt you were dying. As soon as you put it in, you could feel like your just body crumbling.
I think
And
it's
like,
amazing.
yeah.
Like, I mean, I was reflecting on my own time on meth recently,
Yeah.
which is what happened was I was in a rehab in Florida, and I hated living in Florida, and my buddy Todd, who recently died, or died last year,
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
was living in California with another friend of mine. I've told this on Dopey a million times, and they asked me to go live with them, and they said they weren't using drugs, but of course they smoked weed every day.
Yeah.
They took pills, and Todd had just started doing meth.
Yeah.
They just decided not to tell me that.
Yeah.
And as soon as I get there, he's away, but he comes back with the meth, and I was just, I was a drug addict. I was pretty much down to do anything, and I knew the second that I smoked meth that I didn't like it.
Yeah.
That it was not for me, and yet I smoked it. I think I smoked meth for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. But within a month, I convinced Todd that we had to go to Mexico to get pills. Initially, because I was like, I can't do. I think I did meth just as a reason to be able to take pills and do heroin again.
Yeah, yeah.
So like, and then soon enough, I was just like, I did meth like almost because I felt like I was supposed to. And as soon as I got back on heroin, I started shooting meth and heroin together.
Wow.
And whenever I would do that, I would shoot like 1 part meth and like 4 parts heroin. And then I was like, what am I even shooting the meth for? It was almost just like because I had read about so many people that mixed it and liked it, or speedballs.
Yeah.
But like I never really got much out of it. Like I just liked the low because I think naturally I was so high.
I think I was the opposite. I liked meth a lot. Like when we did it, because I think I was sort of like dissociated in a way. I was already sort of in my own opiate state just naturally. So I wanted something to break out of that and to like be really wide awake.
I feel like that's what Chris had too.
Yeah,
because Chris was like, he always would say, he was a baseline, heroin addict, alcoholic, but he lived to shoot coke. And I think it was because he was in a naturally disassociative state. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, just whatever makes sense for you. Like I did opiates, several times, but I didn't like them. I was really like, why would you do that? Like, it was just sort of, I'm already sort of like in a dream state. And then it would just be gone. I would just be like nowhere. Is that what you like? You like just being nowhere, or maybe it's different for you?
It gave me like this ridiculous peace.
Yeah.
Like there's a very famous John Lennon quote of when he started doing heroin, and he said he used to get like butterflies in his stomach, and he would get nervous about everything. And it was a weird quote. I always say it, but he said that when he did heroin, he felt like there were 2 golden eagles. And I mean, that's a weird thing to say, that you have eagles in your stomach. But the idea is that it gives you this peace.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wouldn't say I was, I mean, it's easy to say I was a nervous wreck, but I would say I was anxious. Mm-hmm. And when I came into my opiate addiction, I was producing a very small TV show, and I was hosting the TV show, and the opiate really gave me peace, and it gave me like tranquility, and I felt like everything was okay because I put it in me. I knew deep down that to be cool in the world, you weren't supposed to care about anything. Mm-hmm. But I cared about everything so much. Mm. And when I finally put opiates into me, I knew what it was like not to care about anything. Yeah. And that all got replaced with all I cared about was how I could get the opiates. And then, like, if I didn't get the opiates, I would be sick, and it would be like a whole new level of caring. Yeah. So it kind of undid my master plan of not giving a fuck.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I think in the book, it describes, there's this part in the book where you describe a trip to Africa and Morocco. Mm-hmm. And you describe a place in the book, and I would love to find it. Hold on. Yeah, there was a very, very dopey, poetic passage in the book, and here is the great Nick Flynn reading from Another Bullshit Night in Suck City.
Yeah, this is from a chapter called Morocco. When I went to Morocco for a week and staggered out of there 2 months later. in my mid-20s. The hashish dulls and simultaneously focuses, reduces the day to a pinpoint, to a voice inside laughing, a board strapped to your back to keep you standing. All you are now is high. 2 joints and the doors close. You don't have to go out today. Who would you see if you did?
I love that. I love all you are is high. I felt like that for so long, where all I was that. And then in that same kind of area of the book, you describe buying opium. I never got to do opium. Whenever I bought opium, it was fake. It was incense called soapium that they sold me and called it opium. Did you ever smoke soapium? Gross.
I don't think so. I mean, it's possible. When we were kids, we did like all sorts of opiates, like pills and stuff. Like there were, I stole my mother's Percodans, and there was stuff. We did opiates, I always just avoided heroin, straight up heroin. I was just terrified of needles.
You knew better.
Yeah, I guess, or just it all leads to the same place, even without needles, I guess. But I would someone came into my room once, in my dorm room when I was at UMass, and people knew I liked to do drugs. This guy, I don't even remember who it was, he came in and said, "Do you want to try? I got some black opium," which seems like just black tar heroin or something. I don't know. It's just like this. It was this black goo. We put it in a pipe and we smoked it. I probably smoked a lot because I just woke up 4 hours later. That was my experience. I woke up in the shower, like laying in a shower, like just counting the tiles, like just completely out of it. I was like, that's why I didn't really like it. I was like, what the fuck? Where did those 4 hours go?
Right.
And then but I'd keep sort of like seeing. So someone offered me opium in Morocco, in this town called Mogador. It goes by Mogador or Agadir. And it's a really bad idea to be buying drugs, but I'd already bought like a ton of 50 grams of hash, like my first day there, it was just a really big, because people, they go to prison for a long time if you're a tourist with any drugs. But I ended up traveling for 2 months with this big chunk of hash and trying to desperately to smoke. I didn't want to get rid of it. I ended up smuggling it back into Spain. But this guy offered me opium. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll try that. And so we went into an alleyway. He and this other guy went down to this alleyway, and he pulled something out, and he pulls out this huge knife to cut it with, and he just starts slicing this thing off. And I'm like, that's opium. What is that? And then he just takes the knife and puts it at my heart and just says you sure you don't have any more money? And I was in this alley with no one else around. And it was just I was like, why does this always happen? It always seemed like I was always buying, a few times I bought drugs in the streets, and they always had a big fucking knife, and they always turned it on me. And I was like, here we are again. I'm like, this is the stupidest idea. I somehow.
The trick is you only go to buy the drugs with the money to buy the drugs. You have to. That's number one.
Well, he didn't get any more money.
So what did you say?
I pushed it away. I'd been working, I'd worked with these gangsters when I was, a few years early before they all went to jail. And so I'd been around these rough people before, and I sort of knew you just had to I just pushed the knife away. I was like, get the fuck out of here. I just pushed it away. And then I'm like, let's just finish this. And then I just gave him the money for the drugs that he said. I just didn't take it seriously.
Well, that's like the Keith Richards school.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear about Keith Richards when he moved to New York? He would go down to the Lower East Side to cop, in the early 80s and stuff.
Crazy.
He'd have a gun on him, and these junkie dealers or dealers on the Lower East Side.
Lowering buckets out of windows.
Yeah, but they would fuck with him, and he would pull the gun out and be like, you're fucking with the wrong guy, and it's fucking Keith Richards. Or he would be in Jamaica, and he would have a ratchet, a knife on him, and if people fucked with him, he in his book, he says that he would be quick with the ratchet and cut somebody quickly along their forehead so they bled quickly. Can you imagine Keith Richards? He writes Brown Sugar on one day.
So it blinds you because the blood goes into your eyes.
But do you think he was really some ratchet fighter in the street?
I know.
We'll find out when Keith Richards appears at my dad's house on Dopey.
That gets it back to, the reggae. You've been listening to the dance hall and the reggae, so it gets back to Johnny Too Bad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, walking down the street with a ratchet in my hand.
Ratchet in your waist.
Ratchet in your waist.
Yes, sir. That's my band in high school played that song, Johnny Too Bad. I love that fucking shit. When you had this, that's kind of a quintessential American young man's experience traveling with drugs. Spain, Morocco, hash, opium, around that time, that's Pine Street
No, I was at Pine Street at that point. I left. I would always leave like for big chunks of time because it was a difficult. It was that kind of job. You could leave and come back. So I would leave for like a month and not come back for like 4 months. Show up, they give me the job again. So.
And at what point? I mean, it was your therapist that said to you, "You're a fucking drug addict and an alcoholic, and you need to get sober in order to figure out what's wrong with you."
Well, he said that he wouldn't waste his time treating me unless I committed to going to meetings and quit drinking and doing drugs. Yeah.
And so, did you do that? Was that the way out?
Yeah. I did. I was so annoyed that I had to pay somebody to like. I was so annoyed with the money thing, like that, and it wasn't even that much money. It was like $50 or something a session, compared to now. I think I'm remembering $50 a session, and but I was so annoyed. I was like $50, like
I can talk to my friend for free.
Yeah, and so, but I really needed I was ready to be locked up. He was gonna commit me to a mental ward. Like I was so crazy at that point, and I was presenting very crazy. So he was ready to. He actually had the phone in his hand to call, and I was like, no, I can hold it together. From the drugs and stuff. So I said, okay, I'll stop doing drugs for just a couple months, so we can sort of clear this stuff up, and then I'll figure out how to maintain again. And then it worked. But it turned out to be hard. I thought I was in control of it, and then when I tried to quit, it was really hard. Like it turned out to be hard. I went to meetings. He actually had me go to Al-Anon meetings first,
because your father was a terrible alcoholic.
Yeah, because my father,
and your
being at the
was
shelter,
an addict too.
Yeah, and my roommate was a heroin addict, and everyone was. It
makes
was
sense.
Yeah. So he was doing triage. So he was just
Right.
quit drinking, go to Al-Anon. So I went to Al-Anon, which was good because Al-Anon saved my life. I went there for 2 years, and then I started going to AA. So yeah.
And would you say that was the turning point, the meetings?
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, it was absolutely huge. The meetings, and then just also quitting. Quitting for even a month was amazing. Suddenly at the end of the month, I had all this money in my pocket.
Right.
And I couldn't understand where it came from. I was like, why do I have all this money? Paying for therapy was easy.
Right.
Because suddenly I wasn't spending it all on drugs and alcohol.
And you could think clearly, and then you kind of decided to re-enroll in school, right?
Yeah, to finish up my degree and stuff. But it wasn't easy either. The first year was terrible. I cried every day, and I hadn't cried for years. And I cried every day that first year being sober. Just would break down crying
because of all the stuff that had happened. And
because
your life was so hard, and you were numb to it for so long.
Well, because the drugs would numb things. That's why I did the drugs, because you didn't have to feel anything, and then when you stop doing them, suddenly the feelings rush in, and suddenly you're like, this is really rough. I remember a friend and I, the last guy I did cocaine with, my friend Ben. He and we did coke, and then right after that I went into therapy, and I was like, okay, I can't talk to Ben anymore. He was bad. And then 6 months later, I just ran into him on the street, and he's like, he looked sheepishly at me, and he goes, I quit drinking and doing drugs. And we're both then we could hang out again after that.
That's the best. I love
it was
that.
it was really great. But we would sit around together and say, because there was a whole thing in Al-Anon, be kind to yourself and just realize you did the best you could. And we just would laugh and go, that was the best we could do.
We sucked.
That was the best we could do. It was really bad. It was low level.
But I mean,
but it's true though. But it's true.
And from there, did you reconnect with your dad after sobriety had kicked in, basically? Because you didn't handle it well when he first got to Pine Street.
No, I used more. No, when then I became a little that sort of zealousy thing. Things really got much better right away, even though I felt really, I felt all this stuff. So it was really wonky. It was a mixture. It wasn't like a pink cloud. It was a real mixture of just clarity. But suddenly it was blindingly clear. The world was blinding, so, I could see things really clearly and walk out in the streets and just see oh, it's beautiful. This world is beautiful, but painfully beautiful. But my father was still a total fucking mess. My father at that point was literally sleeping in the streets. He was it was in the middle of the winter, and he was in a trash bag sleeping in the streets, and my job was to go tend to him. And it was really confusing. So I'd be like, hey, let's go to an AA meeting together. Let's try this. But when he died, I went to his apartment, which I'd been to many times before that, and he got off the streets after 5 years, through
subsidized housing
and through strings being pulled by people I knew because I worked with the homeless and da-da-da. So he got sort of fast tracked into this housing.
But did you, when you started really the auspice of your reconnection with him, which I also found fascinating, was you doing a documentary about your mother.
Yeah.
And somehow he turned it into a story about himself.
Yeah. So 5 years later, like I got sober. I tried to get him sober right away. I'm like, hey, I got the secret. We just get sober, and he would have none of it. And that's what I was going to say. Many people over the years, there were a dozen big books in his apartment when people had given him the big book like over and over again to get sober. So about 5 years went by, and then there was a reason to talk to him. I kept in touch with him sporadically. He got into an apartment. I saw the apartment. Everything was okay. I didn't want much to do with him. And then I was in my mid-30s. I'd been sober for 5 years, and I decided to make a documentary film to interview my mother's ex-boyfriends, these 10 guys that I sort of knew that were in my memory of guys she'd gone out with that were sort of these father figures from when I was growing up, and to just ask them two questions, ask them how they met and how they found out she died. And I made this documentary film, and my father was one of the people in it. So,
but that was like the entree of you getting into his life.
Yeah, and that's what sort of began the book. That's the beginning of Another Bullshit Night in Suck City.
Right.
Yeah.
I also just I love the title, and I love that chapter with your dad, and just him kind of like almost making peace with his existence in the world and how much he hated his existence in the world.
Yeah.
And you want to read that section of the book because it's so good.
The Piss of God.
The Piss of God. Should I pause for a second while you find it?
I can find it. It's right here. I like that chapter too. Should I read the whole chapter?
No. Just read that paragraph.
If not for so this is my father. He's been homeless for a couple of years at this point, and I encounter him on the street. I'm working with the homeless. My job is to go out at night from like 11 at night till 5 in the morning. Is that 9 at night till 5 in the morning? And to tend to people who don't stay in the shelter. So, and now my father, I left the shelter because he was in the shelter, then he got evicted from the shelter, so then he followed me out into the streets. So this is me out there and encountering my father on the streets. If not for the rats, you could crawl beneath a bush, a bench, a bridge, the alliterative universe. Rats, too, can pass through that needle's eye to enter heaven as easily as they pass into a box imagined into a house. Houses inside buildings, houses inside tunnels. Some exist for only a day, some miraculously longer. This box held a refrigerator. The refrigerator is in an apartment. A man is in the box. Tomorrow, the box will be flattened and tossed. You've seen the garbage men stomping them down to fit into the truck. Wake up in the grass, soaking wet. Dew is the piss of God. Another bullshit night in Suck City, my father mutters.
No, I want the paragraph before that. The paragraph before that.
Oh, okay. But I thought you wanted it where he said the title.
I do, but I guess I misremember. Where he's all like complaining about his life.
Oh, okay.
Right? Isn't that the one before it?
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole thing. Yeah.
Let me see that thing. Give me that.
Sometimes a man falls asleep. That one, or maybe I read it too pretty. I should have read it sort of more edgy or something.
Oh,
looks like you're misremembering. It's like maybe it's not that chapter at all.
No, it was though. It was like sometimes it was just he's like all pissed. Oh no! It was like all about him being pissed in the streets. It like where he's at. It's raining and he's miserable and like I don't know. It doesn't matter. I mean that's beautiful in itself. But I remember it differently. And I think one of the reasons that I remember it differently, and I experienced the book in the wrong way, which is that I started reading the book and then I started listening to the audio tape.
Okay.
And like...
I've never listened to the audio.
Don't listen to it. It's a great book either way.
Yeah.
But it's weird because the dude who narrates the audiobook...
Yeah, I've heard it's bad.
...is the same dude who narrates the audiobook to David Sheff's Beautiful Boy. And I interviewed David Sheff off the Beautiful Boy thing, and his voice is way better than the dude. And he has a kid. The fucked up thing is that David Sheff has a kid named Jasper. And so he describes his son, Jasper. And you have a buddy named Jasper. And when I hear this motherfucking narrator say both of the names, he's got this bougie thing to his voice that just drives me crazy. Now, I also want to talk about, there's a bunch of things I want to talk about, but I want to talk about poetry. Now,
Really?
Very little.
I know. I'm surprised.
Very
yeah.
little.
I keep sending you poems. You don't play them all. So
I played 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3. Yeah.
That's not fucking.
I'm
bad.
waiting. I'm not going to send you another one until you play the last one.
I think that's fair. But I came up in a pretty like bougie high school, and one of my very good friends in the high school became this renowned poet.
That's right. You told me that. Yeah.
And
I know who he is. Yeah, I remember now. Yes.
And I always thought poetry was such bullshit. Like personally.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm not putting you down. I think I always thought I couldn't understand it. You know what I mean? And I think some poetry is very beautiful, and some poetry is very funny, and poetry is very abstract. But I remember I think I was begrudging my friend's success, and I was talking to another
That's pretty
friend.
sad if you begrudge a poet their success.
Well,
That's
my
pretty
friend
sad.
is very successful.
But a very successful poet is still like sort of a bottom feeder.
Well, he was very full of his success. And I was kind of like talking shit, and I was like, because my friend was such a great bullshit artist in high school. And I was like, you see, a bullshit artist can be a great poet because it's just fucking bullshit, And it's like, but so explain.
Where's the good part of this about poets?
I don't know. That's your job. Clear it up for me. Like, where does bullshit and poetry intersect? And can you only believe a poet who's insane? Is a poet who's not insane a bullshit artist? Is the question.
Wow, that's a
deep.
lot. It depends. I mean, there's all sorts of. It's like any filmmakers and stuff. Sometimes the filmmaker can be a total asshole. Yet they write these amazing things. They write these amazing books. It seems like outside the artist a lot of times. A painter, there's painters that we know that are total assholes, and yet they...
But I'm not saying asshole. I'm saying poetry is such a strange thing.
Yeah.
It's a dance of words. Mm-hmm. It's almost... It's funny because we got into another conversation about psychotherapy and poetry.
You and I?
Yeah. And you were talking about how a psychotherapist thinks they can make an assessment of somebody, and psychotherapy's only been around for 90 years, and he talks shit about a poet, and poetry's been around for thousands of years. But still maybe it's because I grew up in front of the television. You know what I mean? Maybe it's because poetry is the opposite of a sitcom. You know what I mean?
It's possible. I want to make a little film. A film. It could be almost an endless film of references to poetry and pop culture. I mean, almost anything you see, a poem is reference. Any movie, there's a moment where suddenly they break into a poem, and you might not know it, or they might say this is a poem. There's a great Clint Eastwood. What is it? The one where he has to set his arm on a tree. He's broken his arm. He has to tie it to a tree and then set it himself with
Dirty
a belt.
Harry?
No, it's not Dirty Harry. It's a cowboy. It's a western.
The Unforgiven.
No. It's before that.
Another bullshit night in Suck City.
So he goes in after he sets his arm on a tree. He goes into a bar and
Josie Wales, the outlaw. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
It wasn't those. It wasn't any of those. So he goes in to a bar and he sits down. He's just reset his dislocated shoulder and he sits in a bar, takes a shot of whiskey, and then he recites a poem. He recites this poem, and the guy next to the bar just looks over him really shocked. He goes, "What the hell was that?" And he goes, "It's a poem."
What was the poem? Do you remember?
No, I got to look at it again. I got to remember the movie. But I thought it was a beautiful moment. That sort of got me thinking about we should make this sort of a whole. Someone in Dopey Nation, maybe the guy in Worcester, should make this thing about all references to.
I don't know.
Poetry.
I don't think there were many dopey references to poetry before you came along.
I know. I'm infiltrating. I'm trying to insert poetry into the Dopey Nation.
Well, let's do this. This guy, crazy Dopey fan, old school Dopey fan, decided to take you up on the Dopey Poetry Corner. His name is Ian. I believe he's from St. Louis.
Fantastic.
And let's hear Ian. Hold on.
There's no kind of certain despair, quite like the rig's way to ensnare. The rush of dope in seconds flat plays both sides of this and that. The concept itself is actually quite better, inducing perfect highs unfettered. A false memory of what I'll feel is perfection so unreal. Still hunted when you've learned the deal. Not slowing mind's relentless wheel that searches for what's always not. And so the void again you've got. And since all junkies hold what's hot, if void will sell, must carefully trot. Dope sick yawn, a prayer to pawn. Without success, all dark, no dawn. And turn the wheel just on and on. Why do I romanticize? Without reason but artful lies, and pretending I see through pinpoint eyes. I still claim I must be so wise. Until game over, out of tries. Quiet in that void it cries. All companies commiserize. To myself and mine to me must somehow pull some fuckery. Like me as Holmes and Moriarty. A competition I can't see. Will rage until I truly be. Or easy death in 1, 2, 3. But that just sounds like such a bummer. I have a great idea this summer. A new super zero junkie man. To fight it out is tougher than. To find the hell I guess I plan. That might be the hero's saying. And what kryptonite sets off his slaying? Or what arch villain is it obeying? Well, since this comic won't get money, I don't mind that it's dark but funny. That the villain of this stupid books is one who stays by ways of hooks. It's one with whom he can't share looks. This enticing mystery is the saddest sort of enemy. While battling in failing health, he must so spar his own weak self and still fight through the healthy hordes, on, always towards a thankless hell with no rewards. But all throughout the night, you shoot right back to height.
So that's Dopey superfan Ian from St. Louis. What do you say, Mr. Poetry, Nick Flynn?
That wasn't bullshit. That was good. It's a rhyming. He does a little rhyme thing. His voice is great.
He's got a good voice. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very Allen Ginsberg. His voice, which is the way he reads, is like Ginsberg read. So.
Okay. Well, do you ever hear a poet and you're like, this guy's fucking full of shit?
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah.
When?
Sure. When have I heard it?
Yeah.
I mean, often there's a lot of poems I don't like. I mean, there's many, a lot of poems I don't like. I'm not like I'd like every poem is good. That'd be crazy.
No, I think that the whole point of poetry, though, isn't necessarily to be good. It's to like be able to abstractly use words to convey something, right?
I mean, I think poetry is like any art. It's about somehow navigating emotional energy. It's like trying to figure out how to, like, there's something sort of happening that's really ephemeral, like this emotional state, and how to contain that in like language, which is like also giving like this whole, sort of like creating a whole world from that language. Like but it's about the emotional state. It begins with that, I think.
Right, which is what got you down this whole path of writing in the first place. To create a world with language.
I guess so. Just being amazed that you could, I think, and finding things that sort of spoke to me that, like, wow, you can do this thing that exists.
So when did this book really come together?
Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. Well, I mean, there's my father. My first book of poetry came out about 4 years before this book came out.
And he was jealous, right?
He was jealous that I had a book published. Yeah, so I showed him that book.
You're like, fuck you, Dad, and I'm not homeless.
And the book came out, and he was sort of surprised.
Like, I'm going to cook my dinner tonight and read my book.
At that point, when the book came out, he'd been in an apartment for many years. At that point,
it's fun. It's fun for me. I'm sorry.
I wouldn't go up to a homeless person and like sort of rub it in their face. No, he'd been in the apartment for almost 10 years.
But it's your dad who abandoned you, and who like fashioned himself as this great writer. Like there's a certain sadness to it, but I'm sure there's a pain that you had in dealing with him.
It was strange. The pain. It was really painful when he was on the streets. Like the idea that he would die, like he would, get set on fire by a bunch of kids, or get beaten by the police, or freeze to death. It was really painful to think that would be how he'd die.
But you weren't angry at him for abandoning you?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, like, I really feel quite lucky that I did not grow up with my father.
Right.
Like, my father was such a disaster. I feel like we dodged the bullet. Like, if we had, I'm pretty fucked up now. I'd be so fucked up if I'd grown up with him.
Right.
So I feel like that was a great gift. My mother figured out, like, we got to get the fuck away from this guy. Like, do I feel bad that am I angry that he was an addict? Well, we've talked about that. I mean, you've talked about that. Can you be angry that this,
right?
You wish it wasn't so, but anger is not maybe the appropriate, or not any emotion's appropriate, but it's more complicated than that.
What I really want to hear about, and I don't want you can't be late for this thing. What I really want to hear about is like when this book came out and you had this incredible success. What was the experience like?
Well, unfortunately, when the book came out, I'd begun dabbling in using again.
Pre or post?
Pre, like a little bit, like hearing that, like someone offered me, a friend of mine who's still a dear friend, offered me this, I'd managed to, there was a lot of drugs I hadn't done, but he came with this thing that was like, spiritual, almost like an ayahuasca type thing. It was called Salvia divinorum.
Sure.
You know everything.
I've heard of it.
You know everything.
No,
Yeah,
I don't.
It's like
Chris,
a sage.
Chris knew everything.
It's a sage extract.
I've just heard of it.
And supposedly you have visions. You smoke a little bit of it with a shaman, and you have visions and da-da-da. And I was like, yeah, somehow I was open to it. 10 years. I'd been sober, nothing for 10 years. And I was like, yeah, I got this.
I can handle that.
And I drifted away from meetings a bit. I've been doing other things. So it was the usual story. So I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I didn't quite get the first step that, I was powerless. I was like, my life was unmanageable. My life is manageable now. I'm going to try this thing. So me and him and another friend, we just sort of did this sort of ritual where we sat around, and he was trying to be very sort of shamanistic. He was not a shaman. He was trying to be very sort of make it very sort of spiritual and stuff, and lights low and stuff. And so, but as soon as I took a hit off the pipe,
you were high.
Well, I wasn't high. No, I wasn't high. So I was like, give me that fucking pipe. I've already I'm no longer sober, so I'm going to get fucking high. So I grabbed the pipe from him and just started doing it. And he was like, whoa, don't do so much. I did it until I felt it, which was quite a bit. I did it I took 5 hits or something. And then I was really I had a really good experience,
What happened?
Well, it was salvia divinorum. It's like you trip really intensely, more intensely than I've ever tripped for 10 minutes. You just take.
It's like DMT-ish. It sounds.
I guess I don't. I think I did that, but that was sort of a garbagey thing. I was doing it with other things. So, but I did it. The whole world became play school red plastic. The entire world became everything. You were red plastic, and they would sort of your hand would come through the plastic toward me, and the trees were plastic. It was just this crazy. I was just laughing, oh my god, the world is a whole other place. Right. And so then that was the beginning. Then I probably didn't do anything for another 6 months. At one point, I went to Vietnam shortly after that, or at some point after that, I went to Vietnam, and again, I was offered this drink. I was there with the guy that was growing the marijuana in my backyard, who'd been a veteran. We went back there to make a documentary film, and he was like,
was that part of the Mother film, or a different?
No, this is another film. This is another film.
Did you make a bunch of movies?
Yeah, I worked on a bunch of different movies. Yeah, and then he was having a really hard time, real PTSD time, being back in Vietnam for the first time. So he was drinking a lot. I wasn't drinking. Then at the end of the whole shoot, I was standing around with all the veterans, and there'd been this thing in Vietnam called cobra wine, which is just they take an entire live cobra and put it in grain alcohol so it emits its venom, and then you drink a little bit every day, take a shot of it every day, and then if you get bit by a cobra, you won't die, is what they think.
The anti-venom.
Yeah, so I resisted the cobra wine the whole time because I wasn't drinking. And I was like, yeah, I'm good, I'm sober. I'd done this thing, I had this one trip, and then 6 months later, I go to Vietnam, and then suddenly we're with the vets, we're just saying goodbye, and someone brought out this big jar of cobra wine, but they'd taken an entire crow and also stuffed it into the thing. So it was crow cobra wine. I'm like, well, I'm never going to get offered this again.
So you drank wine that had a crow and
it wasn't
cobra
wine. It was
in
grain alcohol.
with
it was
a crow
white
in it. You could see the
crow,
black feathers in there and shit.
the whole bird. It was just stuffed in a big
disgusting.
jar with a cobra in the bottom with its fangs out.
See, I think this relapse really shows who you are.
I took a shot of it, and then I was so by the time the book came out, I was sort of stumbling along. I started smoking pot again a little bit. I was like, yeah, I got this. I did the cobra wine. I did the salvia divinorum. No police came.
Right.
I didn't lose my spleen again.
Right.
So I got this. And then I began sort of using. Then by the end, when the book came out, suddenly there was a lot of attention on it. I wasn't used to that much attention, and I was on the road for 2 years. I was just doing a reading every night in different countries.
That's why you're so good at reading and being on the mic.
I guess maybe. I didn't know I was good. I think you're very good on the mic, actually. Your voice is so nice. So.
Well, but I like the newest thing, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But the newest thing in Dopey is I'm wearing headphones, which I never used to do.
Yeah.
Chris and I never wore headphones.
Oh, no, I heard the early shows, yeah.
And even when we got the board, we didn't know how to use it. And I went to B&H last week to try to learn some stuff, and this Orthodox Jew...
I heard he tried to upsell you.
He didn't really, though.
No, okay.
And in fact, I should have told the story on the show, and I think you're going to find it really interesting. He's this Orthodox Jew who lives in Orthodox Jew land in Brooklyn, and he's like, I studied the Kabbalah, and I believe that everything in this earth starts with sound and vibration.
Beautiful.
And the whole universe was created with vibration.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And so he's like, so why don't you wear fucking headphones when you record your podcast? You know, I don't remember how he got to there, but he's like, do you listen to yourself when you record? And I was like, no. And in fact, usually when we record, I sit back here and I act like cool,
Yeah.
and the other person does what you do, and they sit on the mic like that.
Yeah.
And holy shit, I'm not hearing it for a second. And so like, I was like, I'm gonna try wearing headphones, and it's like way different.
Yeah.
It's way different. It's also just it's a little weird.
The Kabbalah has a thing too. I've been writing about it for a new book I'm working on. The world. There's two books that existed. One's called the Book of Creation and the Book of Splendor. And the Book of Creation is like what happens every day, like the things you have to do. And the Book of Splendor is sort of the mystical stuff. I think that's just beautiful. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna get Yudi on the show so he can lay it down. But so back to the success.
Yeah.
You know, so like you're fucking around and you're smoking pot and you're drinking crow wine and cobra wine and smoking salvia, and then you meet Lily Taylor.
Yeah, I met Lily, and
Was she drinking at the time?
yeah, no, she doesn't drink, but you know, you can ask her about that stuff. You know,
Smart answer.
yeah, but yeah, she wasn't drinking. So, and I was really liked being sober. But at that point in my life, like I was the drugs had sort of like taken over again.
Which just weed.
It was weed. You know, it started out with other things, and I was just trying to stay on weed, but it became like daily, and I really liked being sober, but I really liked being fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, and I couldn't figure out that you couldn't do both. Like I was like, okay, I'll be sober during the day. I'll go to a meeting now and then. I'll tell my sober friends that I'm like smoking pot once in a while. And
do you think what it was though is that you have the success that you've dreamed of? Why can't I enjoy a little bud?
I think it was more like the complications of like writing a book that's so like, you know, it's
Debaucherous.
Debaucherous, but also raw too. It's like about, you know, my mother's suicide, my father's homelessness. There's a lot of shame involved in it, and I had to stand up in front of people. And you know, people were really, you know, beautiful people came up that also had a homeless brother or father. People came out. I became like a model for something. I didn't feel like a model of anything. So I'd have to
a model for pain, raw pain.
I'd have to appear some way in public, and then like when I go back to the hotel room, I'm like, fuck this. Like this isn't real. So you would
medicate.
Yeah. So it lasted for a while, and then I got back into the room. So
what was the worst thing that happened? I mean, and then when did the movie happen? Before we even get to that.
I was sober by the time the movie happened.
So then before we get there, what was the worst thing that happened during the relapse? Is there a good Dopey story?
No, it was like just smoking pot. Like it's nothing. It was really like alone in my room, just getting high and then going crazier, and then just sort of just causing like pain for other people I was with, you know? Like
I love something you had said to me though. You talked about going back to the rooms and like you were like, what the fuck is this? And you felt like very much like people were trying to like coerce you into doing something you didn't want,
and which isn't true at all. Like,
but that's what you felt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't think it was the people in the rooms who were trying to coerce me. I felt like, you know, what is it like? You know, why am I being forced to go here? Like, why do I have to be in this room with these losers or these like, you know, these like
losers,
these people like that are like, you know, I just had such a hard time when I went back in. Like I just. And nobody, when I said that I had been using when I was out and going to meetings and stuff, and I'd say I was, you know, getting high, not one person, everyone just asked me like, well, how's it going? How's that going for you?
Right.
They never said like, oh, you shouldn't do that. No one ever said that, which is really sort of beautiful. And I that's a model for me now. If I know someone who's using, I'll just ask like, how's that going for you? And
it's a weird though, double-edged question because like in the big book, it's like where he says, if you think you can drink, go do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And let's see how it goes for you. And when somebody in the program says, oh, how's that going for you?
Yeah.
They want to hear, oh, it's fucking terrible, or they want to hear it's great.
Yeah.
We're so like, we hold on to like, oh, you're not in the program? Like, you don't have to do this? Like, what is it like for you?
I mean, that's the thing. I think there was genuine curiosity. Like, have you figured this out? Have you figured out a way to do this? And I was like, yeah, I figured it out. But other things in my life were becoming a disaster. Like just, you know, my relationships were not good, and my, you know, I was getting again like sort of feeling crazy. Like I ended up feeling like really mentally ill when I'm using. Like it feels like I'm not a healthy person.
Well, that's what we would call severe mental illness.
Yeah.
Early on in the show, where we would talk about like what was wrong with us, and like Chris had all sorts of abbreviations for
I
his
remember
things.
that. Yeah,
and I said, oh, you had SMI, which was severe mental illness.
Yeah.
And I feel all SMI if I don't go to at least a meeting a week. I get to overthinking everything and worrying about everything.
Well, I realize at a certain point it's just a daily practice. Everything is sort of a daily practice. You just have to like do the things that keep me on a level, not drifting off the rails, falling off the rails. Like I have to do stuff. So I'm going to therapy today. I'm going to, I go to meetings. I go to yoga. I go to stuff to keep me sane.
My practice is lacking, my friend.
Yeah, well, let's go to a meeting, man.
I'm running around like a crazy person. There's so much crazy stuff going on at home and work and this.
Yeah.
I mean, the only good thing about this being becoming a little bit successful is that it has a lot of people reaching out to me, and it keeps me engaged with trying to look out. So that it's like there's no, if I ever say that Dopey's taken the place of a program, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
But to be able to respond to people is good.
But I think even just having a conversation regularly with another addict who's in recovery, I think is very helpful.
Right.
So,
that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
I think I find that very helpful. So most of I met with a friend for coffee yesterday who's a friend in recovery. I do often, even if I'm, if I don't make it to a meeting every day, I'm keeping track of that stuff, and we talk about recovery stuff. So
right. And it's like that's what when you and
which is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And how did you find Dopey?
I heard about it on a Reddit, a podcast out of Boston, WBUR, called Endless Thread, and I don't know why I went to that one, but I just went to one that was talking about you and Chris. It was after Chris died, so it was in the fall, and and then after that I heard the This American Life thing, but I started listening to it before the This American Life. So
right on. We're coming up on a year, obviously, since Chris died, which is very painful and weird. But it's also very beautiful. It's hard for me to talk about what it means that the show got so much bigger after he died. It's it's very weird, but I think of it kind of like the way it's very poetic, if you will. It's the way things are born from the decay of something else, and I think that happened with Chris. I think that it's also watching the car crash. Holy shit, the host died. What's the other guy gonna fucking do?
Yeah.
And then of course it's the stories. But I've enjoyed Dopey. I've enjoyed doing it. I think we're actually gonna do the Dopey live event at the end of the summer to celebrate the year since Chris died.
That's
it's
great.
also going to celebrate the 200th episode of the show.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's great.
Which will coincide with Chris's birthday.
Yeah.
Chris's death day is approaching. Chris's birthday is in the middle of August, and we call that Christmas.
Yeah, I remember.
Because we miss Chris.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna do an event in New York City in August for that. So get ready.
Do it at the end of August. I'll come.
Why? Where will you be in the middle?
Provincetown.
All right. Well, I think we're going to do it last 2 weeks of August,
Great.
and you should come and let us know. I mean, I know you guys think I'm not really going to do it, and it's possible I don't, because I'm scared to do it too. But maybe I will, maybe I won't. I know my dad will want to come, but I won't want him to come.
Yeah.
Isn't that fucked up?
Well, it seems like you have a complicated relationship with your father.
I love my father.
Yeah,
it's
I can
more
tell.
simplistic.
I can tell, yeah.
It's more simple than that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
nobody wants. It's like having a band. You don't want your parents to show up at the gig.
But your dad's so cool, though.
Is he?
I think so.
All right. Well, that's great.
Yeah. I like Alan. Yeah.
How is this experience for you?
This is great. I brought you a gift. Are you going to open the gift on radio? Or?
Where is it?
It's right there. It's a box right there. I made the box for you and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dopey gift.
What's it say? What's the box say?
It says damaged, and I assume you're talking about me.
What is it, though? It doesn't just say damaged.
It's two guys holding a big sign that says damaged coming off of a truck. I'll post it. And it says TLER, which I think is a reference to your wife, Lily Taylor.
Oh.
I don't know if that's true.
I don't know, yeah.
And then inside we have fancy socks
Yeah, I got you some socks, yeah.
that say, love me not.
No, they say,
Love me not. That's awesome. I love that.
I thought I shouldn't get you a cookie, you know?
And then look at that. Some sort of weird thing that says alcohol seltzer. Because I always wonder about caffeinated seltzer. Chris was a big fan of caffeinated seltzer. Now, before we go, here, read this.
What do you got?
I got an email. We might as well just end the fucking show nicely. Can you read an email before we go?
Yeah, sure.
You got a little time.
A little time, yeah.
You can't be late for that. It's going to fuck you up. He's got therapy. Cannot be late. If you're late, you're going to get in big trouble.
It's not just therapy.
It's more than
by
that.
myself. Yeah.
Yes.
So I read the whole thing?
Yeah. Don't read his name, though. It's some guy named Brian.
Okay, the subject line is still there.
Still there.
Oops, told the same story twice. Love you, man.
No, don't read that.
Don't read that? Okay, sorry.
Read it from the body of the email.
Okay, sorry.
Let me see.
I've reached the episode.
Yeah.
Okay, this is subject still there, question mark. I've reached the episode where our dear Chris has left this place. When I first wrote you, I asked if you could keep the show going, and I just noticed you already did just that. Like I said in a different message, I was an IV heroin addict for about 5 years, and that includes the first 3 years of our marriage. I love your show, and I'll write you a quick story if you're interested. Most of the time, I hated alcohol because it's too much work trying to maintain a steady buzz. But one time, about 10 years ago, I drank a couple bottles of wine, and by this time, it was too late to buy booze at stores. I made my sweet wife take me to a local bar. It's a small town. I got out of the car and approached the door. It was locked. I started getting upset. Then I waited till the live band finished at a song. I knocked on the door. They thought I was the cops banging on the door to silence the band, so they yelled into the mic, "Should we let him in?" The crowd yelled, "No, ha ha ha." I didn't know they thought I was the cops. I also didn't know the front door was blocked by the makeshift band stage and that people were all going in and out of a back door I didn't know existed. I got so hysterical and angry that I went out in the front parking lot and I was using a hammer blow to break the windows on 3 cars. I didn't realize it, but a cop was sitting in his car and saw the whole thing. This story gets better and better. Before I moved to the 4th car, he pulled up and asked me if I just smashed windows. I explained that I saw that guy, and he ran down the alley. The cops didn't buy it. He was a rookie and tried to charge me with 3 felonies. That was on a Friday night. I had to stay in jail till the judge got there on Monday. Made some new friends in jail. LOL. What ended up happening was that I talked on the phone with my dad, and I told him to sell all my firearms, safe and all, to both fix the windshields and pay a lawyer. What I did was revoke my probation, so I ended up going to jail in the next county over after getting out of the first jail. All the guns sold for $6,000-ish. $4K went to my lawyer, and $2K went to court costs. By the time Monday rolled around, my dad had used my money from the gun collection to repair all of the windows. When the judge heard it was my own money, he got this look like he was really, really impressed. He dropped 2 of the 3 charges and put me on double probation along with the other county's probation that was just being broken. I can look back and laugh. I try to picture myself throwing a temper tantrum, breaking people's windows, and it makes me smile or laugh. I have actual dope stories too, and if you want, I can either email you or send you a voicemail to be aired on the show. I love you, and I loved Chris. I've loved all of the other listeners that have shared stories too. Please keep this up, Dave. Toodles.
It's Brian, right?
It's Brian?
Is who wrote it?
I thought you told me not to say the name.
Just don't say the last name.
Oh, Brian, yeah.
It's Brian. All right,
yeah.
good. So thank you, Brian. It's a great story.
Yeah.
You like that story, Nick?
I do. It gets better and better. It has like...
Send in dope stories. Send in voicemails. Follow us on all the things. Instagram, Reddit, fucking Facebook, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Nick doesn't engage in that shit.
I do, a little bit. No, I do.
But is there anything else you need to say to the world before you go? Is there anything that you haven't said that you'd like to say?
No.
Dopey Nation?
No, I'm glad. Keep it up. You know, I'm glad you're doing this. It's really good.
It's coming along, and it's thank you. It's fun.
Yeah.
I like doing the show.
You're doing a great job. I really think you are.
I wish, I do obviously wish that it hadn't gone down the way it went down. Because when I listen to old shows, they were a million times, like, this is not against you, I think we had a really nice time. But the old shows were just so innocent and funny.
Yeah.
And it's very painful to listen to them.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I also think it's painful because it's very rare that you have a relationship with somebody that you basically record 50% of the relationship or a huge, maybe 25% of our relationship was recorded.
Yeah.
And it was developed on the show. So it's like, that's why the show is magical, because it's got real magic in it, which was our friendship.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so I mean, it's like a voodoo doll or something, that there's something real in there.
But hopefully that's just spread out into the other people that you're inviting in now. So
I think so. I mean, I obviously, I felt a connection with you when we met. I was kind of scared of you. But then when we hung out and we walked for a while and we hung out outside, we had a really good time.
Did you think I was a stalker or something? Like,
no, I thought you were crazy and on drugs. That's what I figured. But then I realized you weren't. You were just a little crazy and an artist and a poet. Right?
well, I don't know. I'll have my therapist.
We'll say you're a character, but no, I don't think you're crazy or on drugs or a stalker, and I appreciate...
Not on drugs. I'm not on drugs. Yeah.
But maybe you're a crazy and a stalker. And you're definitely not a stalker.
I was a little stalkery because I went to your restaurant.
But you had a friend with you who probably wanted to go there.
But I said to meet there. I said, like, let's meet at this place. Like, there's this guy doing this podcast. I'd like to meet. I didn't. It was just a random.
Well, I figured that anybody who's outside of New York wants to go there. And it's like a...
He lives in New York. Yeah, he lives in...
I thought there was a girl.
Yeah, there was also... Yeah, my friend JoJo was there, too. She met us there also, yeah.
I don't remember the dude.
Yeah, he was named Doug, yeah.
Oh, well. Sorry, Doug.
He's from my hometown. He was the first person I'd get drunk with, yeah.
There you go.
I did a lot of drugs with Doug.
Yeah, what was the number one dopey drug story before you go? You got one?
Number one dopey drug story.
With Doug.
Oh, with Doug.
Or without Doug. Do you have a dopey story that you didn't tell that you want to just lay down real quick?
Oh, I got to think. I'll probably have to call it in or something. What's a dopey drug story? Just like wiping out my motorcycle on, and losing my spleen and just thinking everything's all right. Mostly it's just like thinking things are okay and feeling there were no consequences to things. It's like, and that was just endless. It was just this endless sort of parade of like bad things happening and just thinking there's kind of funny, like having this like sense like it's all kind of wild and kind of funny and like it doesn't really matter. And then finally, like when I quit, just being like, what the fuck? Like why that wasn't funny? Like it was just really terrifying.
Well, that's the weird thing about Dopey. It's like somehow the reason why it was perfect was because Chris and I thought all that shit was funny.
Yeah.
But you got to go.
I got to go.
And we got to get Lily to come on the show.
Okay. Yeah.
And everybody else and stay strong, Dopey Nation.
Yeah. Stay strong, Dopey Nation.
And fucking toodles for Chris.
Toodles.
Thank you. Cool.
I want to take a walk around the world. I wonder would it do me any good? Until I get some money in my pocket, then I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. But I want to be good so bad. Want to be so good, so bad, so bad. I want to be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. And I want to take a ride up in the sky. Watch this aeroplane just pass me by. And I want to see a Lear jetliner take a dive, just to show all of these people what it means to be alive. But I want to be good so bad. Want to be so good, so bad, so bad. I want to be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. And my shadow's getting smaller and smaller. And it's time to where I stand. Shadow's getting smaller and smaller. And it's time to where I stand. And I wonder would they pay it any mind when I leave this busted city far behind. I'll take the high road, however far it winds, because peace and love are very, very, very hard to find. And I want to be good so bad. Want to be good so bad, so bad. I want to be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. Damn it, all these suckers make me mad. And it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever had. And these suckers make me mad, and I want to call my dad, and it's all I ever had, and it's all I ever had, and it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever had. And these suckers make me mad, and it's all I ever had, and I want to call my dad, and it's all I ever had, and it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever